Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Forever Motorsports on Forever Sports for the Forever F1 podcast. All the Forevers in that opening title there. We're joined by Reece and, of course, myself, Mark, here to talk about news from the past week and also reminiscing over the weekend we just had in Austria and looking forward to Silverstone. The talk, of course, with those track limits was an unbelievable thing for all the penalties that were given out over the weekend and yesterday, as well as Mercedes being a big talk and their rather horrid weekend and what could potentially be another horrid weekend this weekend. Some infighting perhaps at Mercedes, otherwise replacement drivers for rookie drivers, all these other things, teasers for cars and otherwise. So lots of news to get into. And Reece, how are you doing? How do you feel over the weekend that just took place?
Yes, I'm doing well, thanks, and yourself, Mark. But yes, that race weekend was just dominance yet again from the Red Bulls, just Max in another league to all of the other drivers. It was good to see some close racing, though, between the Ferraris and the sister Red Bull, at least, for a few laps in the race, but Max just making it look too easy out there.
Yeah, so just going back over, we have got a review, of course, you can go check that out, but Max Verstappen won, Charles Leclerc came second, Sergio Perez up from 15th, finished in third, Lando Norris probably the one of the standout drivers of the day, finishing in fourth, and that's a result of all these penalties that came after the race. I mean, unbelievable the number of penalties that were given out afterwards. Carlos Sainz, one of those few drivers that was severely punished for his track limits, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it really was not a good look from Formula One. We don't want to see the race result being changed hours after the race. We really do need to make some changes to this track to limit these kind of penalties from happening, because it shouldn't be happening. Yeah, it's not good.
Yeah, so as a result, Fernando Alonso moved into 5th position as well, so he got some more points there for the Aston Martin team. George Russell and Lewis Hamilton still finished 7th and 8th. Carlos Sainz then pushed all the way down into 6th position. Lance Stroll finished in 9th, Pierre Gasly 10, Alex Albon 11, Guan Yu Zhou 12, Logan Sargent 13, Esteban Ocon, also one of those who received a few penalties after the race, finishing in 14th. Valtteri Bottas 15, Oscar Piastri 16, Nick de Vries in 17th, Kevin Magnussen 18, Yuki Tsunoda 19, also with those penalties during the race, though, to be fair, and Nico Hülkenberg, who obviously didn't finish the race. So, I mean, they basically said straight away after they gave all those penalties, FIA said, that they're going to look for a solution for this track. I mean, why did it take them yesterday to make that decision? When we knew last year it was a problem, we knew that track limits has always been a problem at this track, and it's always the same two corners. It's turn 9 and turn 10, right before the start-finish straight. Why is it that it took so long for them to say, oh, okay, now we're going to try and create a solution for this?
I mean, I really don't know. I think it's because the FIA has been changing hands quite a few times in the past few years. It takes time under new management, of course, with Mohammed bin Sulayem, I think his name is at the moment. They are making some good changes, but it does take time. Hopefully they do make a change before next year, before we come back to this track, because we don't want to see this happening again.
It's the fact that, I mean, yes, it adds a little bit of drama, I suppose. Don't get me wrong. It adds a little bit of drama, but all
the biggest joke was giving Hülkenberg. The biggest joke was giving Nico Hülkenberg a black and white flag.
I know.
When his car was retiring, he got given a black and white flag for being all four wheels over the white line. I mean, that is just hilarious.
I know. It sums up
the FIA.
Was
pretty much on fire.
I know. It sums it up. So we finished that, with all those track times, and that's certainly something they're going to look forward to changing next season with regards to Austrian track in Spielberg. But Mercedes, I mean, we talk about some of the drama that happened yesterday. We had Toto Wolff on the radio, not just once, but twice. He's not normally on the radio in races, and he spoke to Lewis Hamilton directly over the radio twice. Once when Lewis Hamilton was just complaining yet again about this car not performing, and this car so slow, man, and all this. And Wolff came onto the radio and said, Lewis, the car is bad, we know, just please drive it. I mean, it's like very firm, very straight to the point, as in like basically saying, stop complaining, get over yourself, and race the damn race. We'll talk about it afterwards. So like very much, I think heated conversations probably had in Mercedes right now. It was not a good day for them yesterday at all. And even Lewis Hamilton after the race, he was asked in an interview, says, what happened with regards to possibly provoked Toto Wolff to deliver that remark. And Hamilton's response was also not so sweet. He says, "I don't know." He said, "You will have to ask him." So clearly, at the time, it wasn't all 100% in that Mercedes team. I mean, Toto Wolff played down the comments, and that's what this article says. He's playing down the impact of his remarks that he made over the radio. And he says, no, not at all, with regards to whether or not he has severed a relationship a little bit with Lewis. He says, no, not at all. You should hear us talking on the phone and meetings each other. That was nothing. We've had a bad weekend, all of us in the team, and that just makes us stronger. I'm not quite sure why. It was only for the best interest of the driver and the team. Sometimes there was a certain moment when you need to calm things down, but I meant well. We had a lot of discussion about track limits and whether they were enforced or not. I wanted to make sure we were getting the best out of the package that wasn't performing and trying to give it our best shot. So basically, as we said during the stream, Toto Wolff came onto the radio just to get Lewis back into the mind space of racing, to stop thinking about all those track limits and, get your head down, get to the end of the race. We'll fix it afterwards, basically.
Yes, I mean, I think it shouldn't have too much of an effect on the relationship between Toto Wolff and Hamilton, for sure. I mean, we've heard much worse in the past between them. Some people, I'm sure, will try and make a story of it at the moment with them in contract negotiations, but yeah, it should be fun within that Mercedes garage.
So yeah, I mean, I've got another article with regards to Mercedes, because it just was, unfortunately, the Mercedes problem of the day. I mean, Lewis Hamilton started quite high up the grid, and George Russell started in 11th. Not the best, but we were expecting them to motor up the grid relatively quickly in terms of George Russell, at least. It just wasn't the case. They finished 7th and 8th, respectively, and really not good enough, I think, for Mercedes. We thought they'd made a change and they'd turned a corner for the season in Canada, and then came to Austria, and it just didn't work at all. And Toto Wolff, as I say, calls it a bruising day. So certainly a bit of a step backwards after announcing major upgrades for this weekend, and then Silverstone, which is coming now. So, I mean, should Mercedes be concerned?
I mean, you would think they would have data for a more high downforce track from when they ran their upgrades first in Monaco, but clearly they weren't ready for a circuit like Austria, where other teams already have data from the year before. They are still, you have to remember, on the back foot from switching to their B-Spec car. So it may take them some time to really dominate at every race, but we are still seeing those glimmers of hope in, I think, high-speed circuits.
Yeah, and also we were looking at the grid generally and found that maybe it was to do with their engines and high altitude, or because all the Mercedes engines seem to not perform as well as they have been in very recent times, at least in the last couple of races. Aston Martin also weren't fantastic over the weekend. The only Mercedes engine that seemed to work somewhat was Lando Norris. But then again, they weren't really fighting anybody else, because the Ferrari engines and the Red Bull engines were well ahead of everybody else. The only reason Sainz finished behind Lando Norris and Fernando Alonso, of course, were those time penalties afterwards. But otherwise, the Ferrari engines and the Red Bull Honda engines were they seem to be working better than those Mercedes engines. Do you think it was due to altitude that they maybe struggled?
I mean, you can never really know, because I think you'll only know if you are in that Mercedes garage. But we've seen in the past how Mercedes have struggled at altitude, so it's always possible. But yeah, it may just be because they were still struggling to get to grips with their new upgrades.
I mean, and in response to an interviewee and his questions, Wolff went and told Sky Sports, he said, the car had no pace today. It's a bruising day, I would say, because we had such a good upward trend, and you have to take such a day. There was no pace and no inkling why yet. So that was also interesting to note from Toto Wolff. He doesn't actually seem to have a potential reason. And Russell also says the Mercedes was substantially worse than expected. And when he was speaking to some people from Sky Sports, he said, didn't expect it to be as bad as we were today. I didn't really have an answer for it, really. It was definitely surprising. Sorry, this was Hamilton that was speaking here, and says the feeling of the car was very much the same feeling I've had all last year. It was definitely different than the last two races. The last two races were way, way better in terms of the characteristics of the car. It was fundamentally the same, this race being Austria, as last year when Mercedes were, of course, so terrible. So a few surprises out there. where Lando and McLaren did a really great job. So well done to them. We need to understand what went wrong on our side. And this is Lewis Hamilton speaking, of course. So, I mean, yeah, they just seem very dejected.
I think there will be after having a few race weekends where they have done quite well. I mean, Spain and not necessarily doing too bad in Monaco, but seeing a little bit of a glimmer of hope with the B-Spec car, but then really just being disappointed, I think, here in Austria. Hopefully they'll find their feet again in Silverstone because, I mean, it is their home Grand Prix. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, and speaking of days that would basically wanted to be forgotten about, I mean, we also go and look at the likes of Nick de Vries. Now, Nick de Vries is very much a big talking point, and the fact that we are coming towards silly season is pretty much silly season. We're starting to head into the potential changes in drivers should they not be performing, and one of those big names is Nick de Vries, who we expected so much this season in that AlphaTauri, and yet has really struggled to deliver and has barely delivered at all. And in an article here from Planet F1, it goes and says Nick de Vries' F1 career ultimatum reportedly set as a replacement is lined up. So Ted Kravitz has, however, heard rumors that suggest that Christian Horner actually does intend on replacing Nick de Vries, even after he came out and said there are no plans to currently replace him. And the likes of Liam Lawson, of course, being talked about, one of the reserve drivers for Red Bull. So Ted Kravitz went and said this. He says, Nick de Vries, he really is driving to survive. All the bosses will say this. Will say about this. The rumor that has come out about Dutch press that Nick has been told that he's got the next 4 races on circuit. He knows here, this was Austria, Silverstone, Hungary, and Spa to really transform his season. Otherwise, he's out. They're going to put Liam Lawson in. That's the rumor that's coming from the Dutch press. So, I mean, there's always a little bit of flame from a little kindle of a story. There's always something that's sparked it. So there's always a hint of truth somewhere that must have created the story. So, I mean, do you think there's any truth to this?
I mean, Red Bull are so cutthroat. We've seen in the past how they've just chop and changed drivers in the main team, never mind the sister teams. So, yeah, I think it may be very true. Sometimes when we hear stories like this in Formula One, people just write it off. But when there's smoke, there's fire. So, yeah.
And interesting here is Franz Tost was asked directly about this in the pen, and he said it is up to Nick to make the story go away. So he didn't really immediately go and say, "Oh, there's no truth to the story whatsoever. We Nick's backed or whatever." But said, it's up to Nick to make the story go away. In other words, it's up to his performances. So maybe it is indeed that he's been given a few races to perform, or otherwise he's going to get given the axe. And so it's certainly dangerous times for Nick de Vries in that AlphaTauri, because Liam Lawson, of course, is standing in the wings, ready to take over. And I mean, I just find it so surprising how Nick de Vries has been so good until he got into F1.
It is really interesting because, I mean, he's won in Formula E, done really well in the junior formulas, and just can't find his feet in Formula One at the moment. I think there's a lot of pressure on him after. I think he did really well in that race where he stood in, was it for a Williams last year in Monza? I think it was.
He stood in for someone who was sick. Yeah,
I think it was Albon when he had appendicitis. Yes.
Yeah.
And he did so well, but he's really struggling in the in the AlphaTauri team. So I don't understand why.
Yeah, it's a very big mystery, and we'll see what happens over the next few weeks, and of course we'll bring that news to you as it comes, should anything happen with regards to drivers. Another driver who we've said all season is very much under the cosh, that of Logan Sargent. He actually did all right yesterday, coming in 13th, so maybe a little bit of a fight back for his own place in that Williams team. So, I mean, do you think he's done enough just to sort of calm the rumours down a little bit for now, or do you think Logan Sargent is still very much in that danger zone of being replaced?
He's done really well at this track in the past, apparently. So maybe it is a little bit of a show of what he can do in that car. Not finishing too far off of Alex Albon.
Yeah. So Logan Sargent, one of those drivers who's obviously being dubbed possible replacement coming up for him. AlphaTauri's Nick de Vries, the other one. The other rookie that we haven't talked about is Oscar Piastri. Now, he didn't have a good race at all yesterday. finishing far down the grid, whereas his teammate Lando Norris finished in 4th position. So, I mean, we've said that Piastri seems to have done enough to solidify his place, and that he probably does deserve a seat in Formula One. But would you almost say that he still really needs to work at it, considering the fact that his teammate is doing so much more than him?
Well, you can't really compare the two at the moment, with Lando Norris's car having substantially more upgrades in his car. His turn will come in Silverstone, though. I think he didn't have a great weekend altogether here. Didn't he have a bit of a scrappy start, and then he was brought in as well quite early for a pit stop, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, not a good race weekend for Oscar Piastri, but as I say, he hopes to maybe fix that this weekend in Silverstone. Nobody's really going for the axe for Piastri, so he's safe for now, but certainly needs to get a move on to try and catch his teammate Lando Norris. Now, in other news completely, before we go on to a couple of spoilers and other things that Reece has got for us, Max Verstappen has talked about the 2026 plans and the car plans for 2026, and he's described them as pretty terrible, which is a little bit of a concern. This is based on what he's heard from his engineers. So, just reading here, I just want to find Max Verstappen's response to the whole thing. Oof, my word, there's so much writing and I seem to have lost it. But I mean, they're basically just talking about the 2026 cars, hoping that they will improve. But it basically seems to suggest that the upgrades and all of the changes that are being made to the car are going to make it very awkward to drive, is what he said. I would prefer to control it myself. He says, they've got these active aerodynamics, which you can't control, and the system will control it for you. So it's becoming very, very system orientated rather than the driver itself. He says, of course, when you're behind someone, maybe you need more front and more rear, these kind of things. But if the system starts to control that for you, I don't think that's the right way forward. Plus, weight is going up again. So yeah, we'll have to seriously look at this because, 2026 is not that far away. And at the moment, to me, it looks very bad from all the numbers and from what I see the data already. So it's not something I'm very excited about at the moment. So, for us F1 fans, who most of us are looking forward to 2026, seeing brand new car changes, hopefully it's going to provide for a much more compact grid and more competition. Do you think this is a concern?
I think it certainly is. Max, interestingly enough, looks like he gets quite interested behind the scenes and chats to his engineers about where the sport is going. I think it also helps him decide whether he's still interested in staying in the sport or not. But it definitely tells us as fans that we should be a bit worried with the rules and the regulations not necessarily pointing in the correct direction for good racing.
Yeah. And Reece, you've got information about this weekend coming in Silverstone, which we are all very, very excited about after it was teased on Twitter. So tell us more about that.
Yes, well, I have a article from crash.net just saying McLaren have teased the return of their iconic chrome livery ahead of this weekend's British Grand Prix. Certainly very exciting for me, as that livery is just such an iconic look for McLaren. And we remember Lewis Hamilton being so dominant in those coloured cars back in the past. And McLaren have gone and done this by changing their logo on their Twitter page to a McLaren logo, but it's all in chrome. And also releasing a video of Lando Norris peeking through a door, looking very excited about something. They don't necessarily show what it is, but we assume that it is their car for this British Grand Prix.
Obviously, it's the British Grand Prix, McLaren, a British racing team. And, Lewis Hamilton brought so much success to Britain with that chrome, that beautiful, beautiful McLaren car, that chrome and red livery. And was, as a couple of people I know have talked about it as being like one of the most iconic F1 cars that's ever been, and that ever has been made and ever been raced around. So if McLaren do indeed, and we're fairly certain they are going to come out with that special chrome livery, it's going to be so special to watch, and I just hope they can back it up with a good performance as well.
Yes, well, just a little bit more about this. McLaren last ran a chrome or silver livery at the start of 2015 before moving back to their black livery that they ran for a few years. They then ditched the papaya. Well, they ditched black for papaya in 2017 and haven't changed it since. But also a reason for them possibly going to a chrome color this weekend is because they have a sponsor, Google Chrome, and they've also teased the chrome colors with Google, well, hashtag Google and hashtag Chrome on their Twitter.
Yeah, so I mean, I suppose having Google Chrome as your sponsor is really going to help for that sort of special livery to giving out the Chrome livery. So that is very, very cool. And I think we're going to start wrapping up the podcast here. So Reece, do you have any final news for us?
Yes, just a little bit about this next race. We have a new wheel arch being trialed in the British Grand Prix, and this arch is to reduce spray on the cars in wet weather races. We don't necessarily know how this is going to be implemented in Formula One. I mean, you can't necessarily fit the car if it's already dry out on track and then it changes to wet. You can't necessarily fit it mid-race, I wouldn't think. So I wonder if it's only going to be seen in wet races or going to be a permanent fixture on the cars.
Yeah, and of course, that's quite ironic that it's come out at a rather terrible time. Of course, over the weekend, we did see in Spa a horrible, horrible incident there. And yeah, I mean, is it almost in poor taste that they release it now, or do you think it's a good thing that they go and announce these plans now to release essentially stuff that should minimize spray for these sort of conditions to avoid such crashes happening?
Well, I mean, it is a good time always to release things that could help racing and could help the safety of racing as well. I mean, Max Verstappen has said in an article as well, we should be cautious to blame Spa, the actual circuit, for the crash and for the death. I mean, we haven't really seen many crashes in that area where he crashed. He didn't crash at the exact same place that Antoine Hubert tragically lost his life. I think it was 4 years ago now. It was also down that main straight, but not in the same manner that it happened for Antoine Hubert. Yes, it was because it was extremely wet. But yeah, unfortunately, these things do happen in motorsport, and we do need to move to make these junior formulas even more safe.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely terrible news over there at Spa over the weekend. But hopefully, as I said, Formula One announcing these... sorry, what do they call it again? The exact terminology?
I've just closed the article. They lack wheel guards or mud guards on the back of the rear wheels to reduce spray.
Yeah, so hopefully the introduction of that should minimize those sort of incidents from happening in the future. So it's a good thing that it probably was announced, and we do hopefully see a great benefit in them in the future, and they will be tested out here at Silverstone. And guys, don't be scared to go and subscribe to the channel, like the video, and turn on notifications for all future uploads. We will, of course, be doing a preview on Thursday for this weekend's Silverstone Grand Prix. We're very much looking forward to it and all that could happen there. So I won't talk too much about it today, because, of course, we'll preview it on Thursday. Otherwise, Reece, any final word before we head on out?
No, just hoping we'll get some good racing in Silverstone. It's been a good track for racing in the past, so hopefully it should be a exciting race weekend ahead of us.
Indeed. Guys, thank you so much for watching Forever Motorsports. I've been Mark, Reece has been Reece. Again, subscribe to the channel. Really, we're going to aim for 30,000 by this weekend. Anyway, see you all then. Cheerio.